All the roads are winding.
Well, welcome to the show, and it is so exciting to get to talk with you today, and I cannot wait to hear what you have to say and what the bees have to say through you.
Mm.
So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, would you like to lead us on an invocation?
I definitely would. Thanks for asking. Okay, so to start this out, I think it's just good to find a comfortable seat, feet on the floor, ideally, or the ground, shoulders back. And I like to start this little exercise by just putting my hand on my lower belly, but if that's not for you, that's totally fine. I'm not going to close my eyes. You can close your eyes or just bring your gaze down and soften it. Take a deep breath in and out. And we're going to do 2 more of those. There's something in beekeeping called a swarm, and a swarm is a collection of bees with no young and just a queen, and they're looking for a home, so they're sending out scout bees to look at locations and come back and share information about which one might be the best. And so when I'm trying to tap into my own intuition, my beekeeping intuition, I like to start with some deep breaths. And then imagine that there is a buzzing sort of building in my lower belly. And the vibration of that is building as I breathe. And I like to imagine that in this big ball of bees with just one single queen, there's individual bees going out and bringing information back to the collective. So inside of me is this swarm, this vibration, and there are molecules of myself going out and looking for information around me to try to bring that intuition back to me so I can make the best decision from the most centered place. Because that's what a swarm is. It's a group of bees trying to make the best decision from the most centered place. And I like to let that guide me. So that can be a practice that you use to ask a deep question and see where those molecules of information come from to give you the answers you need. And when you feel like you've asked a question and gotten a little bit of information, you can come back in to the call and join us for a conversation.
That was lovely. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah, and that reminds me of like this. For the first time ever in my life, I saw a swarm of bees just a couple weeks ago.
Yay!
It was so magical. I live in an apartment in like just the middle of sprawl. And I was just out on my balcony. I happened to be outside and I heard this bzzz, and I got a louder bzzz, like, what's going on? Just this cloud of bees. And as quick as they were there, they were gone. It was so magical. It was just like, wow. I also had no idea that that's when they're most docile because I'd never seen them, never thought about it.
Yeah.
So I like ran inside, but I kept the screen open. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So I was like, you're not stinging me today. And you're not swarming into my house.
Yeah, you can't live here, friend.
Not my home. But it was so cool. And I love that vision and imagery and the buzzing and the senses of like bringing the bees into your that sense of the buzzing in your belly, and that like how they, I've since learned more about bees just from that, and not a ton, but how they do go out and do the scouting and stuff. That's so cool.
Yeah. So like you said, it's the time that they're the most docile because there's nothing to protect. They've left the hive. They're looking for a new home, and it's how they procreate. So they split into two, and a young queen stays behind, and the older queen leaves and leaves with half of the bees and goes to look for a new home. So to start, what's so beautiful about that is that it's the elders and the elder queen leaving behind resource, young, and a new queen, so that this new hive can thrive, and going to find a new place. And they'll travel 2 miles from that original location so that they don't create direct competition with the young hive, right? So they can establish themselves, that queen can go out and mate, and they can hopefully be successful. And then there's this other beautiful piece, which is that they leave that queen, she's a virgin, so she's like emerged from a cell, and she still needs to go out and complete her mating flights. And so there's a possibility that this won't work out, that there's like a failure, like there's still a task for this young hive to complete to get to the point of quote unquote adulthood or being reproductive, right? So it requires a little bit more work and support in the young hive for them to get from where they are when the swarm leaves to being a productive hive that's raising young again. And that actually creates an opportunity for them to reset, to sort of fight off or take down any disease that they might have, and give them breaks from some of the pests like varroa mites that are really ubiquitous in the honeybee community for being a ferocious parasite, essentially.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So much just interesting symbology and inspiration there too. Just thinking of like wow. I'm sure we could like spiral down into a tangent, but I first want to know, who are your ancestors? What's your lineage?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So currently I live in the state of what is now called Massachusetts, which is on Pecumtuck, Nipmuc, and Wabanaki Confederacy unceded lands. So just wanting to name that. I also operate part of my business in Seminole and Miccosukee territory down in the southern central part of Florida. And my family comes from a mix of places. So I am white and was raised American, and my ethnic heritage is Ukrainian, Portuguese, French, and German. And the dominant ancestors that I connect to because of my family makeup and who I had access to as a young person are my Ukrainian ancestors. I was actually completely blessed in hindsight to be able to grow up knowing my great-grandparents who migrated here from what is now called Ukraine and Poland, but both share ancestral heritage of what is called Lemkos, which is like the traditional people of the Carpathian mountain ranges. And so when I was young, I think they passed when I was in that 10, 11, like preteen, 10, wow. 11, 12 yeah. age. And so I got to spend every summer with them in New England. They lived in Rhode Island. And they were really the ancestors that connected me to the natural world and to the fact that I had an ancestral lineage beyond, American. Like a white American specifically. And they come up for me a lot. My great-grandmother and my grandmother and my mother, so this is my maternal lineage, they all are women who have prophetic dreams. So they dream about the future. And so my great-grandmother used to talk to me about that quite a bit. My grandmother as well. My mom is a little bit more disconnected from it. Just it's part of her personality that she doesn't, she knows it's happening, but she's not quite able to make the connection of honor there, which I respect that for its own reasons. But yeah, those are really my people. And my great grandfather has been a pretty profound shaper of my reconnection to my heritage, my desire to work with my hands, my desire to work with honeybees. He was always talking about the connection between the Lemkos people and the honeybee, and there's a long history. I mean, across the whole world, there's a long history of humans and honeybees having a relationship. But in in our culture, there is a profound connection between humans and honeybees, and it actually gets passed from generation to generation. So you can't just, even today, in the Ukraine and in what's now called Russia, you can't really just get into the practice.
What?
No, it's it's heritable. Like inherit territory where you keep bees and hives, you have to come from people who are practicing honeybee stewardship. And I'm sure you can buy into the practice as a hobbyist, but really to have those genetic lines that have been localized and lived in the same place for generations, you have to move into that from inheriting it or being a part of your lineage, which is really beautiful to me in a sense.
I mean, it's so cool that they have that relationship through the ages, and that it's so land-based, and a queen only lasts so long, a grandparent only lasts so long.
Yeah.
It's like these generations continue. I feel like that is so representative of ways that probably a lot of people had a connection. I've heard other people talk about this, of like different families having different connections to different animals and things in nature that they kind of stored at each other. And I think that's really, I'm really surprised and inspired that that's still alive in that way in those places. Is that something that you are stewarding and tending to? I mean, is that part of kind of what you do too, is to help create new lineages of that? Or like how does that inspire what you do now?
I love that question. So my great grandfather was a woodworker, who knew that his parents and grandparents had been connected to honeybees. My grandmother, his daughter, was she tended rabbits, and she tended them like in New York City. So she had them on the roof.
Wow. Badass.
Yeah. She was like pre-urban farming. And how it connects to what I do now is I am of the heart and mind that I think it's really important for us to be able to develop a reconnection to land-based, earth-based, animal-based practice, and to try, especially for those of us who identify as white, to really try to connect to the things that our own lineages, that are connected to our own lineages, right? So as much as possible, I'm not trying to co-opt somebody else's practice and what was relevant for their ancestors, but really trying to focus in on what my ancestors practiced and work upward into healing my own lineage through the practices that I do now. So my grandparents came here with nothing, became like factory workers, and a lot of my I'd say my 20s and my early 30s was spent trying to move backwards in my own lineage and go to the places where my people had landed here, to get as close to where my ancestors were as I could, so that using my own lucid dreaming practice and aligning that with wanting to have an earth-based livelihood, how could I get closer to the messaging? And I felt like the way I could do that was returning to places where my ancestors had landed, and trying to work up my lineage to have dialogue with my ancestors about what I should do with my life.
Right? No big deal.
Right. And like what was still stuck for them about these places that I could help move through in my lifetime. And it's been really powerful for me to be able to do that work. And there's an immense amount of like luck and privilege and resource that goes into that. And I honor that. And I honor the fact that like going up through my lineage has really helped me guide myself with my intuition and make the decisions that feel like most right, both internally and externally, for me to move forward. At the same time, I feel like I think that being able to connect to the earth, to ecology, to eusocial insects, to farming practice should be as accessible as humanly possible in this place that we are now, right? And so I'm always trying to figure out how to use my my resource to increase access to that. So I do a lot of teaching, both online and in person. I work with queer and trans folks, so I identify as non-binary, and I work with other queer and trans and queer. I work with other queer and trans folks to try to help them get started in having a bee tending practice or a relationship with honeybees. And I work in the realm of increasing equity and inclusion in all organizations by collaborating with a group of consultants who evaluate where a group of an organization or a business is and help them craft a plan for how to move forward that's like in alignment with their intuition, with creating more equity, and with using cues from the ecological world to tie to choose their like best actions as an organization. So those are sort of all the ways I weave that into the work that I do.
Wow, and I love how it's so ancestrally rooted, inspired from those connections, just bringing them into the modern day and the problems we face.
Right.
Bringing solutions, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to zoom out, and maybe for people, I think that pretty much everyone's aware of like, oh, there's something happening to honeybees, and it's, their hives are getting viruses and diseases, and a lot of people are aware that at least a lot of people listening to this probably, maybe not the whole population of the world, but they're aware that honeybees are getting trucked around the country to pollinate different crops because of some of these problems, and because of just the lack of tending that we've kept between us and the bees. And I would love to hear from you to just kind of zoom out and take us to what are some of the like big picture problems of today, and relative to honeybees, and what kind of ripple down or ripple up effects are they having in our world?
Yeah. Big question.
I know, right? Just no big deal. Just go for it.
No big question there.
How many hours do we have?
Oh yeah, I love this question. I think it's a guiding question in my work approaching honeybees, and it's also a guiding question in like how I'm building a value set and choosing to live my life. So right, a lot of people know there is a movement to quote unquote save the bees, and that is the impetus of that is that honeybees have this pressure. We think of it as like a three-legged stool. The pressure comes from the way that honeybees are used in a monocropping agriculture system. So that's like the industrial agricultural system that we have in the United States, growing huge swaths of land, just one crop at a time. So that's one problem. The second problem is loss of forage due to like development, expansion, the sort of ever expanding destructive capitalist model that we are currently operating under. It's another problem. Small problems, really.
No big deal again. Yes.
Boy. And then the other big challenge for honeybees is, so they have a loss of food. They have this way that we are as humans are in relationship to them. And then the other big challenge is called the Varroa mite. It's Varroa destructor is the name of the mite. And this is a mite that feeds on the lymphatic system of the honeybee. And it came sort of hopped species from one type of honeybee to another type of honeybee, and it's since been really hard for the European honeybees, is what they're called, to adapt to that. And so the mite feeding on their lymphatic system is basically like if we have an autoimmune disorder, and so the entire hive has this autoimmune disorder, and so they are basically starting their immunity from a disadvantage. When you start a new hive, when you grow an existing hive, internally they're basically always trying to fight off a bunch of viruses, and so that like load of viruses becomes really difficult for them to fight off as they grow and expand, because they are already starting a little bit sick, right? And so
because of the mites like eating their, messing with their lymphatic system.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's basically just feeding on their lymph. Like if it was equated to humans, it would be like having giant like ticks feeding on your lymph nodes, not your blood, your lymph nodes, right? So I know, like the fat bodies of your body, and taking your health back a little bit all the time. So it's like having an inflammatory autoimmune disorder like rheumatoid arthritis or like celiac or something of that nature.
I can't help but just, I didn't know that that's what it was. It was like this mite was, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but see the parallels between,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the bees are like immunocompromised and being hit by viruses, and look what's happening in our macro society. Come on, right?
Yeah, it's there. The parallel is very real, and I think that when we really started seeing the impacts of this, it was about a decade ago. It was called colony collapse disorder, and that's what we named it because we couldn't quite figure out what was going on. There's now been, a decade of research really to evaluate that this is a three-legged problem. But there is a lot of parallels to the human system, and some of the influences are very similar, right? Like what's the problem here? We talked about industrial agriculture, which means that bees are being used as the workers in a system to pollinate food that we're then eating, food that is grown in soil that is sterile, often food that is grown on this huge scale, often, and it's grown by people in positions of power making money. And I'm not saying that the farmers that are growing this food or the beekeepers that are doing this work are the enemies of the people. That's not true. And I think it's really important to make a distinction that the problem here is that we have a system that doesn't function. It's not that the people working within the system are bad or inherently doing something wrong. And I think that idea of a good-bad binary is really problematic in and of itself. But
part of the system itself.
A flaw in the design, if you will. So the problem is that we have this big system that is extracting resource from this insect and not really in equilibrium with the reality that this is a eusocial insect that we've had a relationship with since for I think it's over 8,000 years. So we have cave painting. There's cave paintings in Spain of humans climbing, cliff walls to extract honey from hives to make mead for ceremony and magic, right? So we have had a spiritual and nourishing connection with this creature since the dawn of time, and we have let that relationship go in favor of extracting resource from them. And that is a colonial capitalist model of how we have a relationship with the natural world. And my perspective is that we're seeing the impacts of that in the honeybee system, and then we're seeing the impacts of that in the human system now as well. This isn't, obviously we all know this, this isn't a sustainable system. It's not a generative system. And so nothing is getting returned that is creating a balance with the world in which we live. And the longer we ignore that, the deeper into the muck and the mire of this we're going to go. And we're seeing that right now with the COVID crisis. I mean, we're trying to push people to go back to work right now without considering their health and their humanity because of profits.
Right, because the extraction system that our economy is built on is dying, and it's having, really tangible, real effects in individuals' lives, which is such a challenge and such a catastrophe in a word.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to see what are people going to choose differently?
Yeah, that's my big question too. And I really grappled a lot with this. Obviously the work I'm doing with honeybees and the reflective work I've done around the parallels between the human and the honeybee system are not new. But since the onset of the COVID crisis, I've gone through several iterations of my feelings about where we are as a society and what our next best move is, and what we have the power to change, and what we are really stuck with, or need to let die.
Yeah. Well, in that, what are some ways that bees have inspired you, or even just broader nature and looking at ecology? Like, what are some of the guiding concepts, or I don't even know what's there.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think my my guiding light is that honeybees have a lot to teach us, and that if we think of honeybees as a teacher instead of a resource, that that immediately changes the paradigm of our relationship to them, right? And so that's our first shift. And in the what do they have to teach us? I think they have to teach us that there is a path forward with creating cooperative models that are small, and that stay small but reproduce in a mycelial way, so that they can continue to expand what's working and shift what isn't working. They teach us about really clear communication. Honeybees are always communicating. They communicate a few different ways: through touch, through dance, through scent or pheromone, and then through vibration, like a movement-based vibration. And they combine those, and they're always communicating. So the entire hive, when you open it up, is sort of the center of it is what's called the brood nest. That's where all the young is. On the outside edges of that are the food, pollen, and nectar, and honey. And then within that sort of that shape of having the central brood nest and the food on the outer edges, there's constant vibration, and there's constant scent and airflow being moved through the hive to communicate about every single thing that's going on, and to have transparent communication. And then the other thing is we make this assumption as humans that the hive is called, there's something called the queen inside, and then there's the worker bees. And we make an assumption that the queen is the monarch, but actually the entire thing is a worker cooperative of femme workers who are communicating through dance and vibration and touch about the best decisions to make for everybody, right? And that's happening constantly. And the queen has a role as she's essentially like the heartbeat of the hive and the reproductive organ. She's laying eggs, and she's making sure that the hive can continue forward by continuing to reproduce. But she's not a leader. She's actually reliant on all of the workers for food, for help with cleaning herself, for help with making sure that she has enough water, and that her temperature is regulated. Mm-hmm. So the other thing I think is fascinating that we can learn from bees is that actually we as the workers have, we need to put our leaders in a position of accountability, so that they have to answer to us, and not look to them as heroes or the individuals that have risen to the top of it all and thus are the experts. Mm-hmm. They're on top, so they should tell us what to do, is actually not how a lot of natural systems work. It's actually, we are doing this together, and so we need to figure out a way that we can be successful and collaborative and communicative to build this in a way that's generative for all of us and has impact on all of us.
Yeah, very cool. I love that. It almost sounds like the queen bee would be better named the mother, or something like grandmother, mm-hmm. or like, I don't know, I guess grandmother, but like, Yeah,
like the mother is I think a really beautiful way of thinking about her. She's the only one with a sexually mature ovum. She's the only one that goes out and mates, and so all of the worker bees are actually asexual. And the mother bee is the one that is laying all of the eggs. And then we need to give a shout out to the drone bees, who are what we'd refer to as the male organs of the honeybee hive, like the phallic organ.
I was just going to ask, who does she have sex with?
Yeah. So every hive, when they're in a position where there's a lot of food and a lot of resource around and the weather is favorable, every hive will produce what's called drone bees. And drone bees are They are larger than worker bees. Their eyes touch at the top of their head so they can see 360 degrees.
Wow.
I know. So cool. Must be so disorienting.
I guess to a human perspective, but to a bee, they got it, right? They're like,
yeah.
look at the flowers.
And the whole point of that is that their only role in the hive is to go out, fly every single day, and look for queens to mate with. And so
in the hive, or like, are the queens hanging out outside?
No, the drones actually congregate outside in the air in these little areas that are sort of in between where two hives would be. So if we had 10 hives here and then 2 miles away we had 20 hives, the drones would sort of meet in these congregation areas. They're called drone congregation areas. And they basically fly to these areas and fly all around. They can fly for miles and they fly for hours. And they just wait for queens to come that they can mate with. They mate with the queens in these areas. Their penises then explode, and then they fall to their demise. So that's their entire functionality. That's
amazing. Holy crap.
Really important.
Yeah.
And also really kind of like a one-shot deal.
But that's their purpose. They just own that purpose. Wow.
Right. And they don't forage, so they don't bring food back to the hive. They eat quite a bit because they're flying all the time, right? And they're like little athletes, right? They're flying and flying and flying and flying, and they're looking to serve this one single purpose.
Wow.
And once they do, they move on. And then other than that, the bees don't tend to raise drone bees. So if the workers will only have the queen lay drone eggs when the workers feel like they have the resource and capacity for that kind of growth. And otherwise they'll restrict or tear down the cells that have drone eggs in them so that they can focus their energy and resource on the workers. Because the worker bees, the like sister bees, those bees are doing all of the procurement of food. They're doing all the procurement of water, any kind of like mycelium or like fungal material that they need inside the hive. They're getting all of that. They are going out and foraging for propolis, which is like it's a resin that's pulled from trees, and then an enzyme is mixed with that in the honeybee's stomach, and they use that to coat the inside of the hive with what's called a propolis envelope. And it's sticky like a resin. And so it becomes this antibacterial, antifungal envelope that surrounds the entire hive and keeps the hive healthy as long as it stays sealed. And then workers are also the nurse bees, so they're tending to the young, and they are taking care of the inside of the hive, keeping it clean and tidy, circulating air through the hive, and also just making sure that the hive is well protected. So there's all these different roles, and bees move through those roles throughout their lives. But it's not like a hierarchy of roles where like I'm a forager, so I have more power than you as a nurse. It's like we're all taking on these jobs, and we'll all know that we'll move through these jobs through our lifetime and have an opportunity to do all of them for the benefit of this greater hive.
Cool. And I like how they only create the drones when they have enough resources, and they're like, okay, this is a good time to actually expand, versus in our society, it's like expand at all costs, bigger is better, more,
Right. Yeah. And I think that's another really important lesson from the hive, right? Or like an element of the hive mentality is that there's time for expansion and there's time for contraction. And that's true across all of the natural world, even in the swamps of Florida where we're like, oh, it's always growing. It's like, no, actually, like when there's not enough rain, there's not ferns. And then when it rains, the ferns come back and then they die like 2 days later because there's not enough rain. But like there's an inhalation and an exhalation. There's an expansion and there's a contraction, and there's value in each of those moments for the natural element. Like there's value in the hive for them to have that contraction, because then they're not raising a lot of young, and they're not propagating all of that young, which then leads to having more viruses, more sort of pressure from the varroa mites, right? So that contraction is actually allowing them to take a moment and rest from all of the work. I mean, they don't sleep, so they don't rest in the human way that we think about it, but they do contract and wait for moments where there's more food, there's more opportunity, and seize upon those for growth, rather than like the ever expanding model of growth that, again, isn't generative and isn't allowing for moments of rest. And a lot of COVID conversation I'm having right now is like, how are we as humans giving each other the benefit of the doubt that this is a moment for rest? We don't need to be globally available to each other. We don't need to be, oh, I'm home so I can always talk on the phone. Oh, I'm home so I can always organize. Oh, I'm home so I can always make these phone calls. I can always I should be producing something while I'm in this space. And I am really pushing my friends, my clients, my collaborators, like, what does it look like if we use this moment to like draw in and think strategically about how we're going to move forward, because we have no idea what's coming.
Right.
Right? Like, we don't know for sure. We're not a beehive waiting for spring. We really don't know what the next iteration of our world looks like. So what if we take a minute and think about what we want it to look like and what it would take on our behalf to shape that kind of change, so we can really reflect about what we're ready to do, rather than, I'm going to write a whole book in the next 2 months and like it's going to sell 1 million copies. It's like, but really? Like, are we doing books anymore? What are we doing? Let's figure that out first.
Right. And what's your motivation behind needing to sell 2 million copies? Is it so that you can achieve the top of that pyramid, or is it because you actually have something that you want to be a vessel for in the world?
Right. Exactly. I mean, the concept that we individuals need to achieve we need to achieve success as it's defined in this system in order to then use resource to leverage back to our community is broken. Like, we don't need to do that. We need to figure out what the resources we have are that we can share with our community and move that forward as a network of mutual aid, rather than, well, I just need to get mine so that I can give you some of what I got from the system. And that's just perpetuating the same problem. It's not getting us to a place where we have equity of resource and opportunity. It's getting us to a place where now those with resource can leverage it against those without, which is pretty much exactly where we are now.
And we've been there for millennia.
Yeah.
Just same old business as usual. Well, tell us, I'm really curious to hear, what is your kind of vision? Like, if you were to set it forth, and what would you want to see? What do you got to say about that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. For me, I think that this work has really pushed me to think about starting small and building small mycelial networks of humans connected to the earth, of humans in practice building intentions with each other. I think that starting small and focusing on creating equity and power dynamics when we're small, which includes naming where we hold power, where we hold resource, where we hold privilege, and includes naming what we need support with, what we need help with. So it includes both naming our powers and naming our vulnerabilities in a small group, which is, in my opinion, where we're going to have the most success building mutual understanding, is starting small and starting where we are, right? And I feel like this moment that we're in right now with COVID gives us that opportunity, because we literally can't go, like, to keep each other as safe as possible. We are trying to restrict our movement and restrict our community. And so rather than thinking about that as a time to get really insular and like only talk to certain people, what does it look like to start where you are and build for example, for me, I'm in a rural community with people who may not have the same vision or ideas about the world as I do, who may think that my ideas are radical or liberal or impossible or socialism. And may be really scared about that.
I just got to say, I think it's mycelialism.
Yeah, that's what we're calling it now. Yeah, like I genuinely feel a call to be a bridge in this moment, and I feel like there's an opportunity for a lot of us to be bridges between community. I feel like there's an opportunity for us to be in small community with each other, naming power, naming privilege, sharing resource, sharing aid, and sharing sharing opportunity, and really not focusing on, well, how am I going to leverage all my resource so I can come out of this on top? Like, what are the ways that you're going to come out of this as a collective who's held each other in this moment, and that you've been human in this moment, and you've been both vulnerable and used your collective power to move forward a world that you want to see. And so that's sort of my vision, is what are the small ways that we can start shifting how we are with each other socially, so that we can start moving away from this destructive capitalist colonialist mentality of being on top and creating a pyramid in the first place. It's not constructive. It's not going to get us anywhere. And unless we really engage in the unlearning of that and the remembering of the fact that we weren't always like this, right? Yeah, this has been going on for millennia, but it's not how the world has always been. It's certainly not how Indigenous communities practice being in relationship with the earth and the land. It's certainly not how we are. It's how we are programmed now, but it's certainly not how we have to be programmed. There is no mandate that says we have to keep doing this until it explodes and dies. We have the opportunity to say, actually, this sucks. And like, I want to do it a different way. And so what that, for me, the very practical way that looks right now is like, I'm talking to my neighbors. I'm bringing food to my friends. I'm checking in with people to see what they need and sharing resource where I can. And then on a bigger vision level, it's like, I live on a piece of land with 2 other people. And what does it look like for that land? Like, what is the sustainable number of people that piece of land can hold? And how do we increase that? And how much food could we possibly grow here? And how much resource could we share with the wider community? And where are the connections where there are other people already doing work, like growing food or distributing food or creating educational connection to the land? And how do we continue to build pathways forward with those folks where we are? And where we are, because I'm a bit disparate in my practice, is more, I'm like on the whole East Coast. For part of the season, I'm working with honeybees in the Northeast, and part I'm working with honeybees in the Southeast. And so in very different communities. But that gives me the opportunity to think about what resilience looks like in both of those communities, and to ask that question, and to be open to the fact that resilience is going to look different in both of those communities, and that's okay. But there are threads of things that are the same. How are we sharing with each other? How are we building trust with each other? How are we building accountability with each other? And how are we starting to deprogram ourselves from the idea that someone is going to come and save us, or that a leader is going to come and make decisions for us? And actually, we have to be sharing information, sharing resource, sharing power, so that we can successfully make decisions as a group that are going to lead to us being able to move forward generatively rather than degeneratively.
Wow.
So that was a rant.
I want to see like a reality show where you go into an organization and like work them through going from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. Like that's TV I would watch.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, especially for white-led organizations, what that looks like is acknowledging power where it exists, understanding like the histories of harm that have been perpetuated, understanding how in our current organization or community we're continuing to perpetuate that harm, and then really creating accountability models for how we deconstruct that. And then laid over that is the somatics of actually feeling, like really being able to connect to the earth and your own body, so that you can actually feel that harm. Because so many of us in a hyper-productive model, it's really easy for us to take on the worker role and just work, and say we're working on it, say we're doing the thing, say we're being accountable, but not actually feel the grief and the trauma and the need to mend that we have for all of the harms that have been perpetuated by this like colonialist and capitalist and very racist society that we've built, right? And if we can't feel it, how are we actually going to say that we have empathy and understanding for how other people feel and for those that we've done damage to in this system? If we can't feel it, if we can't connect to it, there's no connection to intuition then. You can't tap into your intuition if you can't feel anything that's going on inside of your body.
Yeah, I love that. And we're not going to create a new paradigm if we aren't self-led by that inner knowing, right? It's like we have to have that in place in order to stop perpetuating this power over leader top paradigm.
Right, absolutely. And the other piece for me is really recognizing that on both sides of the coin there isn't a benefit to continuing to use guilt and shame as tools for teaching and as tools for getting mired in our feelings. So like, what does that mean to me? It means I don't want to guilt and shame people into change. Right. I don't think it's not my role. Maybe it's some other people's role, and I respect that. And I think there is actually a necessity. There's a lot of value in being angry and demanding change. There's an incredible amount of value in that. But my role is more, I don't think that shame and guilt are that constructive. I think it lets those of us who have ancestry, who's done harm, who are dominantly white and come from a colonized framework, it lets us get stuck in just like, oh, I feel so bad for everything that happened, which is not me being like, oh, I need to change the way that I operate in the world so that I can have power over my actions rather than get stuck in myself, right? And guilt and shame nobody can feed themselves on guilt and shame. No one can heal the harms of the world using your guilt and the fact that you feel bad, So we need to be able to figure out how to work with that and say, yeah, I feel bad and I'm going to move through that feeling bad. I'm going to allow myself to sit with it and also acknowledge that I have the capacity to move through it and think about what change and accountability looks like on the other side of it.
For sure. And I can't help but wonder, in what ways do honeybees show you, I mean, how have they taught you about that? Or even, this is what we're kind of talking about before we got, started recording. In what ways might we as humans differ that we don't necessarily have the answers from honeybees, but just kind of like where do those weave together and where do they come apart, and how have they kind of helped you actually implement that mentality?
Right. That's a great question, because there's limits to a eusocial insect, right? We're looking to...
And what does eusocial mean?
Oh, it just means totally. Like that they are collective and collaborative. Like honeybees are called a superorganism or a eusocial insect. It's like entomology speak, which basically means like they are a social insect who works collectively, and because of that are considered more of a superorganism, similar to an ant colony, right? Like it's not that the life cycle isn't about the individual bee. There's value to each individual bee's life cycle, and the true value of the insect is in being a social organism or a superorganism that works collectively for the benefit of the good of the collective.
Okay, thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, and so it's important to acknowledge that that's a superorganism, but we as humans, we have our humanity, we have our sense of individual autonomy that doesn't always work with the flip side of our desire to be social and collaborative and live successfully in community. And so how do we grapple with that? That we're not insects, so we can't just do what is best for the collective and make that decision. And that really there's a lot of danger in that for us, because we can get into a place of like eco-fascism with that mindset. We can get into a place where we're saying, oh, well, it's for the good of the collective, so we gotta, kick out that person. Or this person doesn't deserve to have resource because it's the good of the collective is to go in this other direction and to ignore their needs. And that's, if we are going to develop a truly equitable society as humans, we have to be able to hold each other's humanity constructively. And we have to be able to recognize that there's going to be there's going to be moments where it's not possible to always act from the place of it's for the good of the collective. And there's going to be mistakes, right? There's going to be like, oh, we thought it was good for the collective, but it turns out we were wrong. And that's also true in honeybees. And I think about this question of like, how does guilt and shame play out with honeybees? Like, they don't feel guilt or shame. They don't feel in the same way that we would define feeling. But where I have felt a lot of guilt and shame is in all of the learning I've done from honeybees, and where I make mistakes, right? Where I make a decision where I think this is going to help grow and expand the colony. And so I'm going to like choose to add this, I'm going to choose to add this resource to the hive, and that's going to mean that they're going to expand. And then I come back a week later and actually they have crashed because I've made the wrong decision as the caretaker and the tender. And that's where I've been forced to grapple with a lot of my own guilt and shame while working with honeybees, because I've been pushed to think, I think I know what I'm doing. I think I know how to act right in a hive. I think I know what's going to be best for the entire operation, for the production that is reasonable, and I make a mistake, and that mistake costs the lives of honeybees. It costs the delay of my own the beekeeping end of my business to be able to operate. It costs somebody getting stung or getting injured, and whatever the costs are, I always feel like that's where I get to do the most work with my own guilt and shame, and feeling like I messed it up, like I did something wrong in this relationship, and what the outcome is a negative impact on the health of the hive or the health of my business. And so how do I then recover from that? And it's a lot. It's a lot when you make a mistake that you thought you were able to that you thought you had the confidence or the knowledge to move beyond, right? And it's a lot to be able to be like, wow, I thought I was past this, and here I am again making this mistake, the same one. How do I then recover from that? I have to be able to feel it. So a lot of the time that looks like, closing up what I'm doing and stepping away from it, and rather than trying to like bowling ball my way through whatever I was doing and make it work. I have to be able to step back and say, all right, mess that up. Really thought I was past making those kinds of mistakes in my life. And it turns out I was wrong. And I'm going to hold the space to be wrong and take a break. And then just allow myself to feel through that. And that can be, emoting. It can be crying. It can be going for a long walk in the woods. It can be a lot of expletives in a row. It can be sitting by a body of water and just like letting a different connection to earth wash over me, and realize that it's cyclical, and that like mistakes are made and traumas happen, and that systems are made to self-correct for those things. Or it can look like, me being able to come back and be like, okay, how do I fix how do I fix this from a place where I've now regulated myself, and I'm able to come back to it thinking and acting clearly, rather than trying to sort of blunder my way through and ignore what I did. And I think that there's a lot of parallel to that in human relationship, right? When we're in an inequitable society, we're in a place where we hold power in relationships, and we make mistakes and we harm each other. And how do we then acknowledge that, feel it, apologize for it, and then move through it in a way that is healing, rather than is just blundering forward and keeping that wound open in the background to then fester or resurface later for that is in a way that's not going to be good for our collective consciousness.
Wow. Beautiful. Feeling with the bees.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing too. Of us, like, I can't help but think of how, looking at the bee side too, when you make a mistake, they're not coming at you and guilting and shaming you. They're just being bees.
Right.
And like, that's such a beautiful gift, because being bees might mean you might get stung. or whatever, or they might die, and then you feel really bad and like guilty and sad and grief around it, but they're still just being bees. And that's like, there isn't that like, it's spacious. It feels like spacious and accepting.
Yeah. I mean, and it's very ephemeral in a lot of ways. If you know, certain mistakes that we make, especially working with bees in Florida, where like contextually honeybees are technically tropical creatures that have been adapted for like other climates. And so the place where they have like the most adaptive resilience is actually still in tropical and subtropical places. And so the honeybees in Florida are more wild, is how I would define it. It's not European European honeybees, which is Apis mellifera in Latin. They weren't indigenous to the United States. They were brought here from Europe, from the African continent, and some migrated here up through the South American and Central American continents to North America. And so they're not indigenous. They're migratory, and they're also not meant to like grow into these very large hives that we see in standard practice. But the bees in Florida, because they are in a place where there's constant access to nectar or forage, they're constantly growing, expanding, and adapting. And so it's harder to manage them in the same way that the managed practices happen in other parts of the country, or on this particular continent. And so they're almost like less tolerant of our mistakes because they're more wild bees. They're more
autonomous. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's literally more of them in the wild. Mm-hmm. And those wild bees are often coming into managed operations because they're like, they'll swarm off and then they'll land in your hive and decide that that's a good place to call home. And then they'll be in your backyard. And so some of our practice in the South is catching wild hives and then adapting them into our own boxes so that we can have the genetics of these resilient and adaptive genetics.
Oh, wow.
In our own operation. But there's a lot more opportunity for mistake, and they're a lot less tolerant of our F-ups, right?
What happens when, like, what does their intolerance look like?
They will just leave. Like,
okay.
Out of here. Yeah, like take them out of one box. We put up these what's called swarm traps, and a swarm will come into these boxes that we hang up in trees, and then we'll take those swarms down. We'll flip them over and we'll basically cut them out of that box and place them in a different box. And if we do it wrong, if we don't leave them enough resource, if we upset them, just upset the balance of the hive, they'll leave. Like they'll take off, they'll abscond, it's called, and they'll just go make a home in a new place. So they're like, thanks, but no thanks. We're good. We don't want to deal with you anymore.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So a very forced lesson in what you're doing wrong.
Right. And they're just being bees too. They're not like guilting and shaming you for it. They're just like, yeah, not right for us. Peace. See you later. Which is kind of a great lesson. I feel like humans could learn that too. Like, not right for me. Nothing against you, but I'm going to go do my thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If only we could do that.
Yeah.
Or on a wide scale.
Right. Yeah. And that's been a big, it's sort of a forced teaching for us. It's like, oh, they didn't like that, so we're not going to do that again.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Lost that one. One time last year, I went down to Florida and I had a whole bee yard, like a yard full of hives. And in the middle of the yard, I had this stack of equipment, like old bee boxes that was empty. But in the time that I'd been away over the summer, this massive hive had made a home in this old stack of equipment. So all it was just like empty boxes that was now built down into like home. And I was like so jazzed, really stoked to get to work with these bees. And we did a whole cutout, and I which basically means we cut the combs out and put them into a new hive and let the hive adapt to that new location. And so we cut out the combs, we put them into new frames, we put those into the boxes, but we got cocky and we basically were like, oh, we could take this hive because it's so big and make it into two hives. And so we put them in two different places. What we didn't account for was there's another insect that sort of like cohabitates the honeybee hive. It's called the small hive beetle, just lives in there and eats honey and lays its eggs. And then the eggs hatch and they go outside into the ground to pupate. This is a pretty weird but cool symbiotic.
Is it pretty neutral? Okay, symbiotic. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty. If the hive is sort of, if the health of the hive is tanking, the small hive beetle can very easily take over. But typically, it's a pretty symbiotic relationship where they're just like eating a little bit and being kept pushed back by all of the worker bees. So they get sort of kept on the outer edges of the hive, but they like steal a little bit of food and then go back over to them. They're like the little scavengers. So we didn't account for the small hive beetles, and they ended up taking over both of these hives, and both of the hives ended up absconding, like completely.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
We lost everything, and then the hive beetles took over all of the honey. They like eat it, and they release an enzyme that makes it just go bad.
Oh, what bummer.
We lost all the bees, we lost all of the honey, all the nectar, all the resources, all the comb, everything. And
wow.
It was heartbreaking, like really heartbreaking to know that we had basically taken this massive healthy organism and tried to push it to a limit and pushed it too far. And so that's like the relationship for me is like, I want to be able to grow my operation and share and sell bees to other people so they can also have these great genetics. And I have to be really conscious of how far I'm pushing the bees that I'm working with at any given time, because if I push too hard, they're gone, and so it's really this relationship of constant checks and balances and making sure I'm not taking actions that are going to push too hard on what the hives can handle.
Yeah, totally. And that checks and balances, I think it's just an inherent part of nature. And I feel like humans are now being like, oh yeah, we're part of nature because they're getting a check and a balance, right? Like, oh, yeah. Gosh, we just like dove so deep into these different dynamics and these frameworks and paradigm shifts. And I wanted to talk about also like how beekeeping and honeybees inform or are affected by or affect, the queer community and how that wingles together. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I guess the way that I approach it is that I like beekeeping is farming, it's agricultural, which means there's this like wide spectrum of farming. There's like industrial agricultural farming at a very large scale for production, for pollination, for like global food systems, and then there's like small scale agriculture on the other end of that that's like community based and centered, is hopefully sustainable or generative, and is also weaving in connections in the community to help people across the community connect, as well as feed them and or clothe them or provide a resource that they need to live a healthy and productive life. So just naming that there's this whole swath of that. But when I'm talking about agriculture, I'm talking about this more community-centered agriculture. Regardless of what agriculture we're talking about, in order to pursue agriculture, you have to have resource, because it requires access to land, it requires access to capital, it requires access to time to put into growing your agricultural pursuit, which is when you're in any kind of production agriculture, the amount of time that you're putting in versus the amount of resource you're getting out is a very delicate and tender balance.
Slim margins.
Real slim. So that just to name that, like that time that you're putting in is there, it's a lot. It's not like you can have an agricultural side hustle, but ultimately it ends up taking over your life. That's been my experience. So like how does that, what is the connection to queer community? I think a lot of times folks who are queer are trying to get into agriculture, we don't have good models for what that looks like. I have never had a queer mentor, or a mentor that would identify as queer or trans or non-binary. And so when I'm thinking about the connection between my bee work and queer community, I'm thinking about like, how am I a model for my peers? How am I a mentor to younger folks who are queer and trans, or one of those monikers, and want to get into this world? And how do I help folks build their knowledge base, their access to resource, their access to land, so that they can enter into this industry? And then also, how do I help you set like realistic goals for what that looks like? Because
cool.
When you get into this, you're like, I'm going to grow 500 pounds of food like in my backyard.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like, you have no idea what the actual natural checks and balances are, because we live in a capitalist society where we're taught about like growth model only, and not about the reality of contraction and expansion. So when I'm working with other queer folks, I'm wanting to give them access to bees and beekeeping and the idea of running an agricultural, apicultural business, and also ground them in the reality of like, start like small. Like, I have such value in starting small and building thoughtfully, rather than trying to invest all your time and resource into something when you don't know exactly what the returns are, and you don't know exactly what you're going to be able to provide for your community. So on both ends, right? On the end that you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to be able to produce, and I don't know what my, like, if I'm going to overpromise to my community, then I might not have that resource. And then what kind of relationship am I building, and what am I saying about how I want to be in community? And it just gives you more time when you start small to build the skills you need, and to build that relationship of understanding expansion and contraction.
Cool.
So,
and go ahead.
Yeah, I just think those are the ways I'm trying to approach thinking about being a queer farmer, a queer producer, a queer practitioner. And then I think also so bees, in my opinion, is like a bunch of asexual femmes living collectively. Is we've been trying to achieve some semblance of that since like early Back to the Land movements, and like, so there is this thread of connection between a desire to connect to land, a desire like a model of community, and how queer community wants to be, and like how we hope to be, is to have this collective consciousness. So just trying to draw attention to that, and name that, and acknowledge that like there's queer models of living in the natural world. It's not all binary. It's not all like, boy, girl, male, female. It's like, there's more ways of living and being collectively than we know and understand in our current model. And I'm pointing that out and naming that for other queer folks feels important to me.
I love that. I love that you point out to there's queer models of living in nature. That's just an awesome thought. And I can't help but think that like, just somebody who is queer or trans, or just doesn't identify as the mainstream, what's quote correct or right, in our power over society. And they see someone like you who's queer doing this cool thing, and they're like, oh, I didn't even know that was possible for me. And then it opens up a whole new realm of possibilities and potentials and things that maybe they never even considered for themselves, which I think is really cool, because they only saw people that didn't look like them or didn't act like them doing it. Yeah. And I think just you doing what you do, whether it's you doing your bee stuff, or whether it's someone listening who's just on a spectrum that's not in the binary world, doing what they do, that is such a door opener for people to witness.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, I think that I draw a lot of mentorship from people who are living their lives alternatively, like people who are, living small, people who are, living in tiny houses, or they're living in campers, or they're not necessarily having their desire to have kids or family looks very different than the traditional trajectory of like, you go to college and then you graduate and then you do this thing with family and children, and like that doesn't really work for everyone. like, so a lot of my mentors have been people who are living radically, who are living small, who are living also connected to land in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's been really beautiful that I've been able to find mentors who may be cis or maybe like old white men, but still I'm able to be like, this is like the way that I want to live. I want to live in connection to the earth that we live on. I want to live in connection to another creature and build reciprocity with them. And I want to show other people how to do the same thing. And they're like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, and I'm queer and non-binary. And that means for me that like, it's really important that I name and hold those identities while I do this work so that other people have this door open for them. And a lot of those folks have been like, yeah, cool. I'm down with that. Like, I want to be able to support you in doing that. I want to be able to teach you what worked for me and what didn't. And also I might not be able to do that like I might not be able to give you the same perspective that you have because our identities are different. So like being able to both bridge and name that like we're moving towards the same goal, but we have different paths that we walked to get to that goal has been really a cool thing about some of the mentors that I have.
That is really cool and really diverse. Yeah. Cool. Well, this has been such a delightful conversation, and thank you, bee spirits. Of course, the bee spirits have been around. Just so grateful for them, their spirits and their bodies and their beauty and what they bring us. And thank you for sharing. And what do you offer, and where can people find you?
All right. Yeah. So my beekeeping business is called They Keep Bees. We have a website. It's theykeepbees.com. And then I have, you can follow us on Instagram. We're at They Keep Bees on Insta. We're also at They Keep Bees on the Facebook. I just published a really cool resource. It's an online, like an ebook. It's totally free. And it's sort of a weaving of a lot of my different work. So you can go to theykeepbees.com and download the book for free. You just enter your email in and we'll send you a copy. And it's basically like tools for new beekeepers. It's tools for folks that are trying to think about building a relationship with honeybees that is reciprocal. It's stories from all different beekeepers across the North American continent that have kept bees in community and kept bees in an alternative way. So there's like a lot of inspiration beyond my own story that's woven into this work. And then it's sort of my manifesto of like, what is it that we can learn from bees? How do we implement that into our community practices on a small scale? And then how do we grow those small communities so that they're connected and can continue to build the world that we want to see? I also teach classes here on the farm in Massachusetts.
Cool.
I teach in-person classes here. People can stay here, camp here, learn here in a lot of different ways. And all that info is on my website. And for the first time ever, I'm actually teaching online classes as well. So in light of everything that's going on, I'm going to start doing live and recorded streams of my hands-on classes, so people who can't come to the farm can actually join me, and we do sort of this like GoPro live stream of what it's like inside a honeybee hive. So we have everything from like tours that are structured that way to taking more structured classes that are more hands-on to learn more about honeybees and their ecology.
That's very cool. Wow. And so they can basically just look up They Keep Bees and they'll find you in all the places that you're there, and find your website, find your Insta, and your YouTube. And
that same that same channel takes you to my consulting work, which is just like an arm of the business that we operate, where we basically take cues from the hive to train folks about how to be more cooperative in their organizations or communities. And so that's same funnel. You'll find all the information about the types of trainings and collaborative opportunities we offer there as well. So
very cool. Wow. Well, thank you so much for bringing yourself and your bee knowledge today and sharing some of that with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you so much.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.